Hi, welcome everyone. So in today's class, we'll be doing a very short video on growth in plants as well as animals. Alright, so we said that this was going to be a very short topic, so instead of having a class, I decided to make it a video. I think it's better for everyone if we do it that way. While you're here, make sure and like the video and probably comment as well, so it could have a chance of doing well on YouTube, okay? So without wasting too much time, let's get right into it. So as usual, we start off with our green definition, that growth is a permanent increase in the size of an organism. So in order for any organism to grow, all the cells must be able to divide and multiply. And they do this by mitosis. So we haven't done the topic of mitosis at the time of this video, right? But mitosis simply means division into two cells, and these cells are identical to the parent cell, okay? And those cells will then divide again, and then those cells will divide again, and so on and so forth. And that's how growth occurs, okay? So eventually cells begin to differentiate, right? So when we say differentiate, we mean that the cells specialize in certain functions, like how doctors will specialize. Like you have a pediatrician, you might have a cardiologist. So cells specialize according to the function that they need to do, right? So that's really how growth occurs. Now we have different methods of measuring growth in the lab, or if we go out into a field, okay? So this is not really important for your exam per se, but it could be important if you're doing a lab or a practical aspect of the exam, say paper 3, okay? So this table has a lot of parameters or a lot of different methods that we can measure growth, so like your height, weight, mass, and so on and so forth, right? I don't need to narrate this table for you. It's very self-explanatory, so I want you guys to take a read of it and make your mental notes for when you have to do a lab or a practical question, okay? So keep in consideration the height, length, wet mass, dry mass, and know the difference between wet mass and dry mass, okay? In dry mass, we need to actually evaporate the water from the organism, okay? So, and then we have number of leaves when you're talking about plants. We could also measure surface area and also number of organisms if we are trying to measure the growth of an entire population, not an organism, okay? So obviously, think about when you're doing a census for a country, you measure the amount of people, right? And you can see population growth. Okay, so growth is not only with respect to organisms, it could be with respect to populations in an ecosystem. Okay, so this graph over here would show how growth occurs in an organism and also in populations, okay? So there are various steps in this curve, right, denoted by the letters A, B, C, D, and E. As you notice, there are different slopes or different gradients. The curve is a curve, right, not a straight line. So each little letter would denote a point in growth where the speed of growth changes, okay? So in A, we call it the lag phase, and this is very easy to remember. Growth is very slow in the lag phase. Lag means slow, right? If somebody tells you are lagging behind, it means you are being slow, okay? So all growth curves start off being slow, okay? Now in B, we have a phase of rapid growth. As you can see, the slope of the graph moves from kind of not steep, and then it goes very steep for quite a while, okay? So this is rapid growth. Now in C, as you can see, no pun intended, the slope begins to decrease again, right? And we call it decelerating phase, okay? So it begins to slow down. In D, you will notice that the gradient is 0. It is not going up, right? It's staying stationary. So we call it a stationary phase. There's no growth here, okay? And then finally, we have the phase of decline. So this is where in a population, organisms begin to die off, okay? So if this occurs in a population, it means that the organisms are dying or faster than new organisms can be replaced. And we are seeing this in actually developing countries where people are making less and less children, and the population is getting very old, and the elders are dying, and the younger population are not making enough children to keep up with the rate of the elders dying. So their population curve starts to decrease. Now, this last phase would not occur in every population, okay? So in ecosystems, they might stop at D, the population curve might stop at D, and it's no growth, which means that organisms are dying and organisms are being born at the same rate. In lesser developed countries, people tend to have more children, so their population will keep going up. They may not even have a stationary phase, right? They may stop at C and keep going up very steadily. Okay, so there are different situations that could change a growth curve. Okay, so this is actually the main point in this video: growth in plants. This is what you will be asked in the exam especially. Okay, so plants grow differently than populations. Okay, there are two distinct phases in plant growth, right? So in the initial period of growth occurs right after the plant is fertilized. Remember, the pollen goes into the ovule and all that nice stuff we did in that class. Okay, and we have the embryo being formed. Okay, so the seed now will be formed, and the seed grows and it becomes dormant. We say it becomes dormant. So the seeds that you have in your cupboard that you would cook and make food with, you can obviously plant those seeds if you so wish, but while they are in your cupboard, in your kit, or wherever you store them, they are said to be dormant, right? They don't magically grow into plants just like that, right? And then the second part of growth is when seeds begin to germinate. This is where they will begin to grow when you give them water. Okay, so let's take a look at germination. So we said that a seed contains the embryo of the plant, right? So unlike in humans, where the embryo begins to grow immediately after fertilization, the embryo is stored in the seed and will only grow if germination occurs. Okay, so we are taking a dicotyledonous seed as an example here. Okay, so the embryo consists of a radicle and a plumule. So these are very important terms that we need to know. Okay, a radicle and a plumule. Okay, the plumule is also called the shoot, the embryonic shoot. Okay, and they are joined to the two cotyledons. Right, so here we have the radicle and the plumule. The radicle, when the plant begins to grow, will become the root, and the plumule will become the shoot or the stem with the leaves. Right, so R for root. Okay, just remember radicle, R for root. Very easy to remember. The function of the cotyledon is to store food, right? So the stored food will contain proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, the essential things that everything needs to survive. Okay, now the tester, not Tesla, the tester protects the seed. Okay, so the tester is a tough coat in the seed that protects it, right? Also, we have something called a micropyle. A micropyle, which you struggle to see it in a seed, is a very tiny hole that will allow water to enter the seed. So water is the substance that begins germination. A seed will never grow unless we water it. Okay? The hilum is not really important. This is just a scar where the seed was attached to the plant. Okay? So that's really not important there. So the micropyle is very important to remember. Okay, so we saw that water is necessary for germination, but we also need oxygen because everything needs to respire. Okay, whether you are plant or animal, respiration needs to take place and you need oxygen. So you need water, oxygen, and a suitable temperature. Okay, So you can't, that's why when we freeze seeds, they could last for a while, right? So you can't germinate seeds in freezing temperatures or extremely hot temperatures, right? So you need a range. Why? Because everything has enzymes, and we already did enzymes, and we said that enzymes require a certain temperature in order to live. If it's too hot, the enzymes will denature and die, and if the temperature is too cold, the enzymes will simply not work. Okay? So as we said, the water is absorbed through the micropyle, and it will cause the seed to swell, and more importantly, activate the enzymes. Okay? The enzymes now will begin to act on the stored proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids in the seed, and this would cause respiration to occur and really kickstart the growth of the plant. Okay? So the enzymes will begin to break down all of the complex substances into things like glucose and fatty acids that we could use. That, well, not we, but the plant could use to survive for a while. Okay? That's why, sometimes you could just put a seed in a napkin in a cup and water it, and it will survive for quite some time because the seed itself has necessary nutrients that will help it survive for a very long time without the nutrients in soil. Okay? However, it can't survive forever in a napkin. Right? You need to pot it into soil after a while. Okay? So, the use of the amino acids are used for lateral growth. So in the radicle, the plumule, and growth, that's what you need proteins for. Whether plants or animals, proteins are essential for growth. Glucose and fatty acids are used in respiration. Okay? And as we said before, the radicle becomes the root. Okay? And you can see it in this diagram here. Here's the radicle, and here's the root system. Right? And obviously the plumule will then grow upwards. Okay, so here's your plumule. It develops into the stem and the leaves. Okay, very easy, I think, very simple to understand. Okay, so again, this is the staging in the germination of a typical seed. Okay, the only important things you need to know here is the radicle and the plumule growing. Okay. And here you have your annotations that you also need to learn. If they ask you to draw an annotated diagram in germination of a typical dicotyledonous seed, then you need to know how to draw this diagram and annotate it as well. Very simple. Now, why we had to do plants separately is because the growth curve of a plant is very different from animals and populations. Okay? So this is how the growth curve looks in a germinating seed, right? We have 3 phases, X, Y, and Z. So we are using the mass as our y-axis and time as the x-axis, right? So we are measuring the mass of the seed, okay? So as the seed germinates and begins to grow, remember the stored food is being used up for growth, okay? So initially, the mass is going to decrease, okay? Now at Y is where the plumule begins to shoot up the leaves. And as long as you have leaves in a plant, the plant begins to make its own food. Alright, and this is where now the mass increases as the plant could actually make its own food, store more food, grow, and it grows heavier and heavier and bigger. Okay, so this is the growth curve of a germinating seed. Very, very different from the growth curve of a population. Okay, so that's what you need to learn there. You need to know the differences between those curves. Right, so let's go a little more in depth now into plant growth. So every plant has something called meristems. Okay, so plant cells has the cell wall, right? Now the cell wall is very important in protecting the plant cell. However, it restricts their ability to divide via mitosis. Remember, you need mitosis for growth to occur, but the cell wall blocks that. It blocks the cell from dividing. So plants now need to have groups of immature cells, okay? These immature cells have very thin walls, okay? So these cells they are not mature regular plant cells. You know, the plant cells that you like to draw in the first few classes that we did. So immature cells, they are also called meristems, right? So they are immature and they don't have that cell wall, so they are able to divide. So it is the meristems that control plant growth, okay, not the regular plant cell, right? So immature cells, also called meristems. So meristems will be found in places of growth. So you have it on your stems of your leaves, but not anywhere else. Okay, so only where growth occurs in a plant, you will have your meristems. Right, so let's take a look at the roots and the shoots and how it grows. Okay, again, you have your meristems, right? That's what you need to grow. So in parts of your stem, some of the cells are permanently there, right? Some parts of the stem doesn't grow, and part of the root doesn't grow. Okay, so let's take a look at the root here. This whole thing is the root, right? So the plant is above this structure here. So I'm just going to draw the stem and some leaves and stuff so you understand, right? So this is just the root. Right at the beginning of the plant and the root here, this is permanent tissue. There are no meristems here. Okay? Now, right underneath there is the region of cell differentiation. Right? So this is still not growing cells yet. Right? This is where you develop your xylem and your phloem. However, underneath that region, we have the region of elongation. So this is the part of the roots that grow. Okay, the region of cell elongation has the meristem that grow. Okay, and we cap it off, no pun intended, by the root cap. At the end of the roots, we have a root cap. So, contrary to what you might think, roots don't grow from the end of them. It's not like you have a root here and this part will keep on growing, This part remains here, but the middle portion will grow. It's like you're stretching the root from the middle. Okay, so it's the middle of the root that grows, not the end of it. Okay, the root cap will be always there at the end. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now let's take a look at the growth in the width of roots and stems. So this was the length of the stem, right? It was growing down. So, but trees and roots also grow in width. They are very thick trunks sometimes in trees, right? So there are actually other types of meristems called lateral meristems. And they do exactly the same thing as normal meristems, except they do it horizontally, right? So they cause the plant to grow wider. Okay? So that is really all there is to know about the different types of growth in plants. So remember, you have your regular meristems and you also have your lateral meristems. So these two different types of meristems need to have the right balance, because if there are too many lateral meristems, the plant will be too bushy and will not be tall enough, and therefore it might be blocked off from adequate sunlight, and that could cause problems. Also, plants, if you don't have enough lateral meristems, the plant will grow too tall without any branches or without any thickness in their stems, and it'll become quite weak and they could just break and die. Okay, so it's very important to have a balance between the two types of meristems. And lastly, we just have a comparison of the growth in plants and animals. Okay, so it's actually very self-explanatory. So duration of growth, plants will grow forever. Okay, if you chop down a huge tree, eventually you will start to see little shoots trying to grow back again, right? So it will keep growing, it will keep growing and keep growing and keep growing. It will keep branching as well. No matter how big and tall a tree gets, if it stops growing vertically, it will start to branch off and branch wider and wider and wider. Okay, so we say that growth is continuous throughout their lifetime. In animals, obviously, we will grow to a certain size, and then we will stop growing. Now you might become fatter, but that is not growth, okay? Another feature is where the cell division occurs, and we said in plants, cell division only occurs in certain areas that have meristems in them, okay? So the meristems will only be in the middle or the ends of roots and shoots, okay? So it's very, very important there. And in animals, we don't have a cell wall in our cells, so cell division will occur everywhere, okay? Everywhere in our body. And finally, how growth occurs in plants. Remember, the seed needs to germinate via water, okay? So water enters the cells, and water enters the vacuoles in the plant cell. Remember that huge rectangle in your plant cell, it has a lot of water, and the cell will begin to grow and swell just like that. However, in animals, cells will increase in number via mitosis. Remember, plants can't divide as effectively as humans. Remember, we have animal cells, but plants only rely on the meristems to grow. However, their regular cells will grow larger via the water, but our cells, our animal cells, will become more plentiful. Our animal cells won't become larger, but we will have more cells, okay? And it will work the same way in growing, just like plants. They don't have more cells, they have larger cells. All right, so that is an important differentiation there. And really, guys, that is all we have today on growth. So I hope you guys learned something. If the best thing about a video is that you could always go back if you need something repeated, and if you still confused of something that I said here, or you have any questions that you would like me to answer, feel free to message me on WhatsApp, okay? I'll be happy to answer your questions. So guys, remember to like, remember to share, and remember to subscribe. Let's try and get the biology going on YouTube, and I will see you guys next week. Okay, bye guys.